Welcome to the Connected Life Book Club podcast with Summer Shepherd.
That's me.
And Nikki Corbin.
Hey.
Welcome to your place to connect with a good book, with God, and with each other. The Connected Life Book Club podcast.
Hey, it's Summer and Nikki. Welcome to, I think this is week 4 of the Connected Life Book Club, season 5, studying the lost women of the Bible. This week we're jumping into chapters 5 and 6, or if you are not going by chapters, Tamar and Hannah are the two ladies we are jumping into this week. And I've got to say, Tamar was a very eye-opening chapter for me, Nikki, because I completely admit I fell into that alternate view of Tamar as a less than admirable woman. And so their view of Tamar in this book, it was very, very surprising to me. So before we jump in with the questions we have outlined, is there anything that you just are like, before we go anywhere, I want to talk about this thing?
Oh my word. Well, this whole chapter for me, because I, like you, was like, seriously, wait, we're going to talk about her? Like, this is a good thing? It's all about perspective and circumstances and like really truly understanding where she was at during that time. You know, I guess I hadn't put that into consideration when I was like, ew, girl, like, ew, this is not okay.
Okay. And then not to be like graphic, but like when you read stories of like, and then she seduced her father-in-law, do you not instantly like put yourself in her position, be like, no,
nope.
You think of your father and like, oh no.
Nope, no.
So, but that's where I feel like we miss out so much when we don't understand the biblical context, what was going on for those people, what this tradition meant, but it was a great point, the fact that she has been listed in the lineage of Christ. She never once was talked about in a negative way in scripture. And yet we, through our modern lens of interpretation, without understanding context, have really just painted her as this harlot. And like how unfair that is, because we can't wrap our mind around what she did being seen in any other way.
Right.
And so I think for me, I was very convicted by that, because I'm like, man, now, I know this is a podcast, not on air, but I won't say, but I'll just say I shamed her. Okay. I don't want to use the cultural term. I you know where I'm going with that. I shamed her in my mind, and I feel real guilty about that. So there's been a lot of come to Jesus moments for me already in this book, checking my own perceptions of these women.
Oh, yeah. And it makes you wonder too, like how many times now, definitely different circumstances, but how many times has that happened in our lives? You know, I mean, whether it's us judging other people or people judging us. And it's unfair because we don't actually have the whole picture. Like when I first learned about Tamar, you judge her because you don't understand the whole context, the whole circumstance from her perspective, from that time's perspective, you know?
Well, what a beautiful segue into our first question, Nikki Corbin.
I didn't even mean to do that.
So the first question that we put out on our discussion guide was, when we consider Tamar, we see a woman known for her deceit, trickery, and moral failure. However, that's not how the Bible sees her. So when have people written you off or misjudged you, failing to see the whole picture? Nikki?
Oh, gosh. This hit home for me, too, because I think for most of my life, see, I'm a pretty like go with the flow, generally positive person, but a lot of people think of that as just like, oh, she's just passive and nice, and like that's kind of where it ends. You know, like I think I get passed over a lot with things because people like just don't they underestimate me, I think. And I think because of that, I've actually underestimated myself a lot. And so that actually, that was hard, particularly jumping into the position that I'm in now, because I'm the station manager at a Christian radio station. And, you know, people are like, whoa, she's in a position of power, but how? You know, she's this girl who's really passive and, just underestimating like, well, yeah, sure, I can go with the flow and I can be nice and kind, but I have a mind too, And so I think, I don't know, that's what that made me think of, but it's even still a thing I wrestle with today, allowing other people to dictate who I am and be misjudged and then kind of eat that as my truth. Does that make sense?
I think that is the struggle of women everywhere. Like, I mean, I think that is the cry is it's like, you are underestimating me. You are looking past me. You are telling me who I am. And then so often we internalize that and it becomes who we are. And then that becomes the message that gets passed down to our children. And we perpetuate, as women, we are not innocent in perpetuating those lies and those closed-minded views of our sex because you know what? Like I said, I judged Tamar the same way. I accepted that interpretation of who she was.
Yep.
But it says even in here how it feeds that bigger understanding when you consider Eve and Tamar and even Esther and Ruth as being like these promiscuous women or these flawed women or these morally, and how it's like, well, look, women are temptresses. Hey, look, women are broken. Women are seductress, and it's just, but I guess in the back of my mind, I held that to be true too. So,
right.
Yeah.
It was interesting too, though, with that lens and looking at Tamar, we just completely rule out Judah's responsibility in there too. Like, as a righteous man, he should have been like, nah, sorry.
And what was life like for Tamar? Because they don't go there. When it says like her husband was wicked, her first husband, Lord knocked him off. Like he's just like, dude, you're gone. So how wicked must he have been? And then her second husband, wicked, destroyed. Yeah. And so she grew up with Judah enough to know that if I pose as a prostitute, there's no question that he will approach me. So it's like, what was life like in that household? That wasn't even a question. She knew how to get to him. And she knew that he would go for that. So I think that there's a lot of, that's put on her. But another thing they pointed out was like, now this is jumping maybe off of Tamar, but it mentioned in this chapter how we consider Bathsheba as well. Bathsheba, we know her as the chick who took a bath outside and was seen by David. Like that was totally her fault because she shouldn't have been naked in public, but her husband was murdered. She was taken, it's like she was a victim in a lot of ways. And yet we see her but we don't look at the men for their moral failures nearly as harshly as we look at the women. So even as women. And that was, again, a come to Jesus moment for me. Here I'm thinking I'm so enlightened and I struggle with that too.
Story of my life, I feel like.
But for me, so with this question, I think in many ways, exact opposite of you.
Okay.
So for those who don't know me or haven't seen me or whatever, I get misjudged a lot, especially in the church, because I have tattoos. I have a nose ring. I have stretched ears, right? Like I'm kind of like, people look at me and they're like, oh gosh, she's troubled. And that always shocks people when they know me from the radio station and they hear me on air and they're like, oh, this girl loves Jesus and I want her to be my daughter's role model. And then they meet me and it like shakes them up a little bit. Now, I've got to tell you, Nikki, I do that on purpose. I don't take out my nose ring. I don't cover my tattoos because I think it's helpful for people in the church especially to understand that, you can't tell me I don't love Jesus because my ears are stretched. And yet that's the first place people go. They're like, oh, she clearly is, a delinquent, or she clearly is pagan or whatever. And I've faced that since I came to the Lord. Now, I came to the Lord from a place of brokenness, and I already had my piercings and some of my tattoos at that point. And so like, I get that, but often people just by looking at me will write me off. Mm-hmm. And so I kind of wear those adornments as like a badge of honor to kind of like shake out the Pharisees. Like if that sounds bad, it's like a little.
I kind of love that though.
Oh man, I love
it.
I love my in-laws, for example, so much. I'm so blessed to be in the family that I'm in. But my husband is an immigrant from Romania, his whole family. And his dad is a very conservative Romanian pastor. And so when we started dating, They loved the fact that I was in ministry. They loved the fact that I worked for Moody Radio in Chicago and I was in Bible college. And like, they were impressed by those credentials, right? That's something that, I don't know, they care about. But they would say things like, Summer is so pretty. You need to get her to take out that nose ring. Or Summer's too bad. She has those tattoos. And it was like a big stumbling thing for them to the point where I refused. It's like in another circumstance, maybe I would have. For that, I wouldn't. I'm like, nope. I'm absolutely 100. And it became like this hill I was willing to die on. Maybe that's a fault of my pride or something. But so I get misjudged a lot when people look at me or when they do hear my story and they do hear my past, which was very drug, sex, and rock and roll. You know, like they look at that and it's hard for them to see past that sometimes.
Sure.
But when we can't see past that, when we can't see how, you know, and not even referring to Tamar because, you know, the Bible would say she didn't fail in what she did. Right. But even when we fail to see beyond those people who did fail, we cheapen the redemptive power of Christ.
Mm-hmm. Amen.
And so for me, though, that's where it comes in is sometimes people, they'll see tattoos or piercings or stretched ears and they'll write me off.
I could see that. And that's really unfortunate.
Yeah. So I'm like, so I don't hide it. Because I'm like, y'all are wrong. I don't often make statements like that, but it's true. You know what?
Oh, my word.
Oh yeah.
Word.
All right. So yeah, no, I was so blessed by this chapter. And I loved the line. I highlighted it where it said, Tamar didn't corrupt the line of Christ, because that's something people would say. It's like, wow, look, God even used these morally corrupt women, you know, in the line of Christ. Look how he can redeem anyone. But it says Tamar didn't corrupt the line of Christ. She rescued it. If she didn't do what she had done, then that Judah's line could have ended there, because his son, well, at least when it comes to, you know, his sons and keeping the family name going, because he wasn't doing what he needed to do. And I love where it says, oh, this is my girl. She wasn't called righteous for her quiet and gentle spirit. She was righteous by being strong and assertive. She was a godly leader. Girl, yes. Very few people look at me and they're like, oh, she's so quiet and such a gentle spirit.
I do love that about you. No, I actually highlighted that same line because, man, it's so powerful. It's so true. And I think that because I do tend to be a little more quiet and gentle, don't ask my husband. He will probably tell you otherwise. But this was actually kind of a call to me too. Like, okay, now I do hope, I would imagine that I would do the right thing when the right thing is needed, you know, in God's eyes. And so I'm not saying that, but this idea that you have to be strong and assertive, like in those matters of heaven, you know? And so that is our call. And then I even highlighted a little further down, it says, God calls the Azer to be strong.
Yes! Highlighted that too.
Yes. And the next one, I really liked how she put it. Should Tamar put starch back into our definition of what it means to be a woman?
Yes, she did. But
straighten us up.
The next paragraph down, though, it brings such a great point that, like, you know what? Yeah, women are often strong, you know, in the PTA, in Mothers Against Drunk Driving. I mean, we do all sorts of things for the women's and children's ministry of our church and stuff. But culturally, our strength stops when it comes to the men. So it's like, you know, we are strong, strong up until there's a man in the way. And now, like, we just defer. So I just love how by pointing out that, no, Tamar wasn't this morally corrupt garbage face. She was she was a strong and powerful woman standing up to the most powerful man in her life.
Yeah.
And challenging his own sin in a way that, kind of icky. I wouldn't do it. You know,
right,
but again, different culture, different time.
Yeah.
But it was her strength that she's lauded for. And I thought that was a beautiful perspective shift on her.
Yeah, I had to get there too. Like I truly had to put myself in that context because I was like, I cannot condone this. I cannot condone this. And in order to, like, not that you have to condone that act, but you have to understand how and why and you know, the culture at that time to make that shift to, like, no. She was fighting hard for God. That's what she was doing, you know, for Judah's line and ultimately Jesus, you know?
Yep. So going to the back of the book here. So as every week, we usually offer about one of our own questions to reflect on the chapter, but they offer so many great questions of their own.
So good.
So we almost didn't even offer our own discussion guides because we're like, well, it's here, but we also like to offer our own discussion guides. So, Nikki, what of these questions jumped out to you?
Well, I first marked what responsibility did Tamar share with her brothers-in-law, because that made me really think like, oh goodness, yes, she is kind of equal to them in responsibility. I mean, we know during that time, like women had a role and men were higher, but the idea was that, I mean, it takes two to tango, and they needed to, the goal was to continue the line. And so by her, what is his name? The one that was Onan, when he was like, doing the deed, but then not doing the deed. And
that was such a cute, gentle, quiet spirit way of putting that.
Well, I just didn't want to go there, but then I had to go there. But, it was like he was shucking his responsibility. He was like, shirking. What do
I think
you
you
say?
shuck corn and you shirk responsibility.
There we go. He was shirking his responsibility. And so then Tamar takes on that responsibility, and she was just being bold enough to do that. Like it's a shared responsibility for them to continue the line and, be righteous in God's eyes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I just thought that was kind of interesting.
Well, and then the question 5 is how is Tamar a strong example of an Ezer in her relationships with the men in her story? Because, it comes out that from the chapter on Eve that an Ezer is man's staunchest ally, is shoring him up where he is weak. And she had a lot of weak men in her lives, powerful but weak men. And she was strong but not powerful. So like coming together, she's like, you know what, guys, you need to shape up and we need to, to do this thing and do this thing. Not just do this thing and not do this thing, but do this thing and do this thing. And so, I feel like she really kind of came alongside and filled in where they were weak. Now, okay, the question that just immediately got me laughing was number 7. So I want to hear from you on this one, Nikki. It says, have you ever been set straight or rescued by someone you thought was less righteous than you?
I feel like the entire length of my dating my husband.
Okay.
This was like a point of contention for us. Like, see, I was a fairly new committed Christian when we first started dating, and he had like he dove right in, he was in it. And he is very much one of those like fixers. And so I have to admit, I had a lot of fixing that needed to happen in my early days. And I was very stubborn, and I didn't like his teaching ways, shall I say. But I will, on reflection, and even to this day, I tell him like, man, I don't always enjoy when you set me straight, but it's good. Like it is good. And that's actually part of why I think I married him, was because he's a good leader in that way and has good, has good things to say. But yeah, I guess I've grown a little emotionally and in my faith, but don't ask him.
So your husband set you straight.
Oh man. Over and over again.
Do you know who set me straight? Do you know who I thought of when I thought of this question? Who I've been rescued by and set straight by?
Uh-oh.
My 5-year-old daughter. And my 3-year-old daughter.
Gosh,
only she's 4 now. But
my word.
There was this one story in particular that stuck out in my head. So we were driving, and I remember being super tense. Adrian wasn't with us. He was probably doing drill. He's a reservist in the Army. And so this is before the twins were born, but I'm pregnant. And I have my then 3 and 5-year-old in the car with me. And it was dark and it was raining. And I was like creeped out because there was no lights on the road, but I was surrounded by these trucks, like semis, right? And they just didn't care. They didn't care that, I'm a mama in a minivan with some kids, and they were just being jerks. And so they would like cut me off, or they wouldn't let me over. And I'm in a construction zone too. So it's like, I'm like really close in with all the barriers, right? It was
so
just
stressful.
So I was super stressed. And, some guy, so he pulled in behind us and he didn't think I was going fast enough. Now, the conditions weren't great. And so he starts flashing his brights at me. Now, this is a truck, right? So this is like right in my mirror. And I'm like, so I yelled at him. I'm like, come on, man. Are you serious? Or something like that. I didn't swear. I didn't do anything like that. But I was angry. And so like I'm fuming. And my daughter, she's like, Mommy, that is not how we talk to people. She's like, Mommy.
Oh, my word.
You should have said, sir, would you please move around? I don't like that you're flashing your lights at me. And she's like, there are better ways to say that, Mommy.
Not a girl.
She goes, Mommy, you need to apologize to him and you need to ask for forgiveness. What? So I'm like still upset at the truck. But, at that moment, like I just melted. And at this point, I'm just trying hard not to laugh because she is sincerely.
Dead serious. Yes.
And so I'm like, baby, you're right. And so I like wave in the mirror. I'm like, I'm sorry, sir. And then I pray and ask forgiveness for the Lord for saying it meanly. But oh my goodness. So yeah, and it's not the only time that my kids have set me straight when I'm not walking when I'm talking,
Oh my word, that is the cutest. It was so stinking cute. And right, she did set you straight.
She sure did. He was still, okay, guys, like real talk, he was still a jerk, but
Right.
She wasn't wrong.
Sorry, Jesus. We still think that.
Yeah. All right, so let's move on to Hannah. So next chapter here, this is a woman that a lot of us see as a hero, have always seen as a hero. For me, it is hard for me to relate to her, but I'm excited to jump into this chapter because, again, there was stretching in different ways for me. So the question, Nikki, when has God allowed you to go through pain to show you more of who he was? When has your own reaction to trials surprised you?
This was... my answer here actually was kind of inspired by my answer to number one. So I actually jumped into this role pretty quickly. There was somebody left. And so then I was asked, first of all, hey, are you ready to lead? And I said, I don't know. And so that was not the answer that my boss was looking for. And so he kind of made me the boss in the building without giving me the title. And so I had to walk through this period of like, am I good enough? How am I doing? What is even happening? It was like the anxiety through the roof because I just wanted to do a good job. And at the same time, I was kind of wrestling with like depression and just all these things. It was such a like stretching, painful time. And then, and I will admit, like I still go through some of these seasons, but each time he brings me through it because it just reminder after reminder after reminder of like, this isn't my job. This is him doing his job through me. And I have to rely on him, to get any of it done. And when I don't do that, that's when I feel that pain. And that's when I feel that anxiety. And that's when, I struggle. And so I think it's still to this day one of those things that I wrestle with. But through that, man, I mean, I've just been shown his faith and his providence and like just so much. It's incredible, to be honest.
Yeah, I actually had to really kind of sit with this one because I haven't had a lot of those moments where we would consider like Hannah, where she's praying for years and years and years to try to have a baby and stuff like that. But I recall as a new believer, okay, well, let's back up. So BC, the way I refer to it, before Christ, I would say with everything else that I was mixed up in, my biggest addiction was relationships, like my relationships with guys. And that had been a constant just my whole life. And so when I became a Christian, I hadn't set super healthy boundaries. I knew I loved Jesus, but I started talking with this one guy who wanted to be a missionary as well. And so it was kind of like, ooh, I have questions, like, let me pick your brain. And then we just started talking all the time and it ended up becoming more romantic. And I referred to him as my complication because it was never official. But so like, anyway, so that's just like this whole other story of how just rotten awful that relationship was. But what you need to know is that right before we started talking, he had been engaged and he had broken it off with her because he wasn't ready, right? That's not what he told me. He gave me a very different story. And so he ended up kind of seeing us both at the same time. So I had to bring that relationship to the Lord a bunch of times and like give it back to God and just really seek him. And again, I'm a baby believer, not even a year in the faith. Like I just knew very little about God. And after one of those recent, I can't do this anymore, never talk to me again. I mean, that happened like 40 times. His ex-fiance / current girlfriend, I guess, had reached out to me and that wasn't great. Oof. And she had wanted to have lunch, which was very much veiled in like goodwill. And I just, want to meet you. And it wasn't. It was a scoping out situation, right? And so I went and I sat with her and it was painful. And I blessed her in their relationship and I assured her it was done and everything. And I get in the car and like I expected to just hurt. And I did. I hurt. But when I opened my mouth and I felt like I didn't know what to say to God, but I opened my mouth and I just started praising him. And it was the first time in my life I had experienced that peace that surpasses understanding. And I remember like turning on some of my favorite worship songs and just crying and praising and praying and thanking him for the difficulty because I knew that he was growing me through it. And so that was the first time, that was like a marked turning point in my spiritual maturity. When I realized like, this is really painful for me, Lord, thank you for letting me go through it because I know that you wouldn't let me go through something that wasn't for my good. And it ended up being totally for my good and I grew a lot. But that was the first time in my life where I found myself able to do that.
Wow.
Yeah.
That is such a good story.
I wish it ended there. There was more complication with that guy after that. But
oh, man.
That was a piece of it for sure.
But good life lesson learned.
Yeah. Lots of lessons learned. For a lifetime. Okay, so talk to me about this chapter, Nikki. What did you think? What stuck out to you?
I honestly, okay, so Hannah, I too haven't really fully related to her because, again, as we kind of talked about, like, I haven't had those years and years and years long, like, desperation moments. And then this idea, like, her faith, I aspire to have just that faith like she had, that willingness to just give up her most prized possession, her son, to God and just praise him the whole time. That is not, if I am being realistic, that is not something that I feel like that's not where I'm at right now. Like I couldn't give up my child and be like, thank you, Jesus. You're so wonderful. I just, cool. This is so cool. I wouldn't be as strong as she was, but I do love how, there's so much of this chapter that was inspiring and that I, highlighted, it's this very first, okay. So page 122, they're talking about Ben Carson. It says, I not only saw and felt the difference my mother made in my life, I'm still living out that difference as a man. And that kind of just set the tone for me for this whole chapter and just really put that mother lens on it and how important our faith and our showing of our faith and our sharing of our faith to our children, and the hard work, the hard work and the diligence and all of it, all of the options that all of our abilities to show our children, God in every aspect of our life. Like it's so important that they can still live out that difference in their life. Mm-hmm. And so I don't know, that was the first thing that really stuck out to me was just the power of a mom.
And I love what I highlighted was a section where it was talking about our prayers and who is our prayers for. And so like when we pray, God hears our prayers, right? And we hear our own prayers. So often when we pray, we're ministering to ourselves, we're verbally processing, but our children. So the example that she set of faith for Samuel, setting him up on the life he went on to lead, was invaluable because, we are a witness for our children they're watching us in ways that are terrifying. But that example really rung true for Hannah.
Yeah. And then, man, also on page 134, it talks about like God isn't the only one who listens to our prayers. Prayer is a way of talking to ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
And I love that too, because I think, I've done that so many times. Like you're just talking to God, and during your praise, during your, thanking him, it's like you are reassuring yourself and you are reminding yourself of that truth. And it's reassuring. And so I think we forget that too. Like, when we go into just our mode of hard and how we're asking God for all these things and we're struggling, when we choose to praise, not only is that good in God's eyes, but that is like heart healing, peace giving, because we are reminding ourselves of his goodness in our life and for us. And so, yeah. I mean, God hears our prayers, our children hear our prayers, our spouses hear our prayers, our, if you allow it, your friends hear your prayers, but you hear your prayers and your praise. That was powerful too.
I've got to say, like this, diving into Hannah was hard from my heart because I have a hard time relating, not because I haven't suffered the way she did, but because her sacrifice seems so horrifying to me.
Yeah. Right.
And I mean, I get that it was a good thing, but as a mom, and now I have, babies again. So I'm back in that nurturing, helping them. They rely on me stage. And to think about willingly giving them up. Because for me, honestly, understanding Abraham was easier for me. Like, he was willing to sacrifice his son on the actual altar. But for me, there was just, I guess, a difference in my brain because this was a man. Understanding this mother with a mother's heart and the way I feel for my kids, like absolutely horrifying. But I appreciated the perspective shift where it says from page 130 to 131, she willingly offered up her most priceless treasure to shut the mouth of the one who dared to mock God.
Yes.
So it's
I highlighted that too.
It wasn't just, I'm a failure, I can't have kids. If you let me have kids, which is going to make people think I'm not a failure, I'll totally give them back to you. It wasn't about her. It was about shutting the mouth of one who would mock God because, her sister wife or whatever was, just being nasty. And I hadn't ever, I guess, really considered what that dynamic was. But oh my heart, I want to read this part because it just, there is no describing the emptiness Hannah felt when she returned home. Because this section, and I'll read it, but I think we do often look at what Hannah was rewarded with. She got 5 more kids and it's like, look, see, it was much better for her. But this picture of, there is no describing the emptiness Hannah felt when she returned home. A place no longer ringing with the laughter and shouts of her little boy at play. And what of those long, quiet evenings with no child to tuck in for the night? He was so far away. No telephone, no email, no way to stay in touch. No little face gazing up at her as she dressed or fed or cuddled him. No small hand in hers. No mathematical equation could even out Hannah's sacrifice. Her separation from Samuel left a permanent hole in her heart. And just understanding that, and maybe someone listening understands that because they lost a child. It's a reality I don't like to let my mind go to because I put myself in that position and then I will be messed up for days. But it doesn't matter. She'll never forget Samuel. And the fact, she got more children, but it was probably at least a year while she sat there, even pregnant, like thinking of and missing her son. And maybe someone listening has sent their son away to college and understands that a little bit. But even you have the ability to stay in touch. Like she effectively gave away her son forever. And just stepping into her pain in a new way it's so easy with these stories, Nikki, to just read them quickly because they're told in a couple of verses and then we move on in scripture. But to really understand these are people's lives is just so much bigger.
Yeah. Yeah, like she's a real person with real feelings. And I just can't, it's so hard to put yourself in there. But, it said Hannah's heart is fixed on her great God. She had walked with him down a long and bitter road, and because of her suffering, had come to know him better. And then I actually, so on the next, that was page 132, 133 here, it says too that even the great reversals of life, those changes we seek and the ones we fear, wealth and poverty, health and sickness, conception and barrenness, are in his hands. Things done covertly by plot, subversion, power, or deadly force, as well as things that happen by accident, are all under his thumb, and they must serve his good purposes for us, no matter what someone else intends. And it's so hard to walk through that suffering. But, like you had said before, and I think Hannah's doing this too, like she's praising him through it because, she knows that this is ultimately for God's glory and for, she's being molded, you were being molded, and all of the things that we go through, we're not alone. All of it is in God's hands. And so it's tough when we're in the throes of the hard and the yuck, but we have to remember that God he's not lost. Like he's still in there with us. Mm-hmm. And so I don't even know how I would get through what Hannah went through, but apparently she did. And, I like how the author also says that every time she just like kept going through Hannah's, her story, she just said, she always points me to God.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. When
so I just aspire to do that. That's Hannah's my new goal.
Well, I mean, that's the greatest calling that you can have. And I think it's important to acknowledge that while Hannah suffered, like it says, Hannah wasn't holding on to God as much as he was holding on to her. And
I love that.
God was in control over the events that were breaking her heart, that he was at work in her pain to draw her closer and making her strong, and that he was holding her tightly and was not about to let her go. And I think that that's the reality, is there are times where we can't hold on anymore. We can't be strong, and he invites us not to be. And I appreciate that. And the fact is, Hannah did fail, right? Like she idolized having a child, maybe too much at first. But then God worked in that. And like, I love the line where it says, Hannah was strong because she stumbled and fell on her face. Like that's what brought her to this strength in the first place. He brought her to the end of herself so that she could go deeper with him. And one of my favorite lines in this chapter, his reign ranges from the secrets of the human heart to the public rise and fall of political leaders and nations. Like he's in all of it. So if you are struggling, if your heart hurts, like don't be afraid to give that over to God, because he's just as active there as he is in bringing about nations. So was there anything at the end of this chapter, Nikki, that stuck out to you? Any of the questions?
Oh, man. I mean, all of them were just, it's so good. I wrestled a little bit with what was Hannah's main focus in her relationship with God, because my first response was like, well, having a baby. But, in the end, after this chapter, it isn't. Maybe like you said, she idolized having a baby for a while, but it truly ended up being like, no, God, I just want to glorify you. I want to, clear your name from Peninnah and, just all the bad that she is saying, like, you are good. And so I think her main focus in her relationship with God is just praise and thankfulness.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that understanding that her desire to have a child was also more complicated than ours in our consideration today. Like the culture and what it meant for a woman to bear and have children, and like just the status that went along with that was so much more complicated. But I liked question 8. What have you learned about God during times of struggle, and how does knowing him strengthen your passion to fill the earth with his glory? There's been times, whether it's when my daughter was in the hospital or, when I've lost someone close to me, that as a believer, I have found that peace that surpasses understanding. And I just so badly want the world to know that they don't have to remain stuck where they are in their sadness, that there is hope, that there's something better. And that when you're in that place, it can seem like there's no way out, but that is something unique to believers, is that we know how the story ends. And even if life doesn't get better here, we know who wins the day. We know where we're going to end up. And it's just that hope, especially in the midst of how bad so many people are hurting right now. It's like, I just want to come alongside and just shout, there's a better way. You don't have to feel this way. You don't, that there's better things coming. And so I think for Hannah, understanding the hope of the Lord and the promise of his goodness got her through what most of us wouldn't be able to get through.
Yeah, for question 8, actually, is kind of relevant for me right now because I think I have lost a fair amount of people in the last few years that were pretty special to me. And so what the hope that I have held on to with that is like, well, I know where they are. I know they're in heaven, and I know that I will be in heaven, at the end of my days. But I recently found out that someone who was really special to me in high school, that he was given 2 years to live. He has a cancer. And my first response, or one of my first responses, was, oh my goodness, does he know Jesus? Mm-hmm. Like, does he have that hope? Will I get to see him again? I mean, that was kind of a little selfish, but I love that we have that. I love that we have that hope. And I love that we have the opportunity in every single day to share that hope and to fill heaven with as many people as we possibly can,
Oh, I'm sorry, Nikki, that you're going through that. And would you mind, just for everyone listening, would you share his name so that we can be praying for him?
Yeah. So his name is Noah.
Noah. Okay. That should be easy to remember after what we've been studying.
After Mrs. Noah. So thank you for that.
Oh, of course. And thank you for joining with us this week. Thank you for being a part of our discussions. Now, of course, Nikki and I want to hear what you think of the book and what you've thought of these chapters and which one of these women you relate to more and what stuck out to you. And you can let us know always on the Facebook page. If you haven't officially signed up, which is, of course, the only way to get that invitation to the Facebook page, you can go to connectedlifebookclub.com and do so today. Invite your friends to be a part of this community and make sure to subscribe wherever you get your podcast so that next week's episode can be downloaded directly to your device, because we're going to be right back here to talk about Esther and who comes after Esther?
Mary.
Oh, Mary number 1. Okay, those are 2 biggies. So, looking forward to that talk. And
Me
Nikki,
too.
Thanks again for chatting with me, girl.
I love it.
Yay. Okay, meet you right here next week.
Join us next week for more of The Lost Women of the Bible by Carolyn Custis James with Summer Shepherd and Nikki Corbin. Get involved in our Facebook group and sign up for weekly discussion guides when you visit connectedlifebookclub.com today.